literature. We talked about them yesterday with the visual disorder. We talked about them in the somatosensory domain. We can talk about them in emotional domain. And the notion is that your brain can basically be sending out a message, and it doesn't get sent to the interpreter that there is an error in your processing system. Because if you have a lesion, the information is not getting into an interpreter, so you get into a bizarre situation. And one of the ones that's very common is when you have a right parietal lesion, there's one of your domain monitors goes down, and here's a typical: you deny illness, you deny that your left hand is yours. It's a very common clinical phenomenon. And the question is, when you first see one of these patients, you think, well, that's crazy. I mean, they're crazy. I mean, what's wrong? That's obviously the doctor's holding up their hand. It's their hand. But if the system inside your head doesn't think there's anything wrong, then your interpreter is sitting there with no cue about anything that's going on in the room. And so what happens is, this is an actual dialogue from a patient published by Ramachandran. Patient, doctor, whose hand is this pointing at her own left hand? She sees her hand there, but she has this lesion and she denies there's anything here. Whose hand is this? Doctor says, well, whose hand do you think it is? Patient says, well, it certainly isn't yours. And the doctor says, well, then whose is it? And the patient says, it isn't mine either. Doctor, well, whose hand do you think it is? And the patient says, well, it's my son's hand. Now that sounds crazy, but the interpreter is getting bad information, so it's a perfectly reasonable conclusion to come to, given the information and the lesion that's been invoked inside the head. So there's examples from the emotional sphere. This is a very common thing. There are reports now that half of New York City is on Prozac. And what happens is that it's an anxiety-reducing drug. So what happens is that when people are walking down the street and they're on Prozac and they would have seen as a menacing situation coming towards them, they now don't. Everything's fine, the world's wonderful. So what happens? ER admissions go up for muggings and all the like. You've clipped the system that cues you. The interpreter is not getting that information anymore, so it makes a different interpretation of the world, and so on. You can see how it goes. So, in moment-to-moment activity, this interpreter is always dealing with this changing site in the brain as to where conscious activity is going on. And this is the work of Matt Roser, here now at the Plymouth University. He was in the lab for several years. Student of Michael Corballis's from New Zealand, wonderful man. And he's pointed out that in trying to understand this classic illusion of Michaud's causal balls, they're called Michaud's balls, he points out the following, that if you take the phenomenon that a ball coming across and hitting another, making it look like it compels the next ball. We all see that, and then you start breaking it apart, and you make it so the ball doesn't quite hit the other one, and then you temporarily do it so that the ball hits, and then it's a little bit of time before the other ball moves. You break apart the illusion. When you do that experimentally, you find out that the right hemisphere is the one that succumbs. The right hemisphere is the only one that sees these illusions, and they're the only ones that deteriorate as you break it apart by this way of creating the spatial discontinuity and the temporal discontinuity. So what does that mean? He compared that then to this task, where you're given this and your task, and you're trying to infer which is the answer to what makes the bottom box light up. And of course, if you follow that through, you'll notice that it has to be a line has to be part of it. The right hemisphere can't do that task. It just simply can't do it. The left hemisphere does that task, lickety split. It's easy to do. So what do you have? As we sit here in the room, and if we had time to go through these in greater detail, as you see your ability to compute the 1-5 phenomenon, the balls hitting each other and impelling, that's your right hemisphere. And then next I give you a task that involves causal inference. That's your left hemisphere. So you can just see that where your brain activity is dominating your sense of consciousness at any given moment is constantly being pushed and pulled by the fact that these things are distributed in different places, but we just blend them together. So let me go on to the next one. So now we come to we're almost at the end of